transformative process, and it can't be directed outward. So that was that. And then the other question was, well, yes, but reaching more people is valid, isn't it? You need to reach more people. You want to spread the word, etc. And that, if I looked at that closely, I also had to realize that that wasn't right. That wasn't true, because that's actually not what I feel. I don't feel that it is my job or anybody's job to wake up the masses. That, I think, is a very mistaken idea. First of all, because it presumes that we or whoever's doing the awakening is already awake, and I don't presume that for a minute. I know full well that I'm not awake. I might be a little more lucid in my dreaming than others. I might have a sense that, wait a minute, this is a dream, isn't it? But that doesn't mean I'm awake. You see what I mean?
Mm. So, I mean, in that sense, just because your podcast was growing, did you feel that you had to repackage it and change the format just because of it? Or did you rather see that you had an opportunity there and that was what led you in the wrong path? Is that right?
Well, it was, I think it was simply a matter of, this has been a success, and that is enough. Why try and take it to the next level? I don't want to be the next David Icke. I don't want to have a following, and I don't want to be propagating ideas or narratives for people to follow. You see, I was just doing a self-exploration process and invited others to join in, but inevitably it became less and less about the message and more about the messenger. That it's an inevitable process. If one turns what one does into a product, then one is branding, one is packaging, one is marketing, and
you didn't want to do that.
As I say, no, I felt that it would be untrue to the spirit of the enterprise. Finally, that I would be deceiving people without meaning to. The whole cult of personality thing, it's a great paradox, because I was talking a lot about how we don't know what's what, and I don't know what's what, and I was trying to be absolutely as open as possible, and yet that in itself kind of, I think, attracted people, and that gave them the idea that maybe I knew what I was talking about, because I was claiming not to know what I was talking about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it becomes a bit weird. Well, to me, right up off the bat, it feels like also that if we look at human history, this is, we have been involved in commerce, trading, services against another service. There's a whole tradition, if you will, that even that, I think, and feel is part of our genetic, and even our unconscious forces that are driving us, that we have handled things in a certain way for a certain period of time, and we can't just erase that overnight and expect that everything should be different the other day. I think it's a slow process, and I think it's a good initial step to begin to think of it that way, obviously, to begin to change things. But it sounds maybe that it's a bit too much to change everything in overnight. You know what I mean?
Sure. Well, yeah, but we can only change ourselves in the end anyway.
Yes.
And I mean, the question is how much does it benefit our own transformation to sort of enter in? It's like kind of, joining the thing to beat them, or, trying to change the system from within. That whole thing of being a virus. Well, we're going to be changed by that process. If we try and streamline and package what we're doing in a way to reach people because we think that that's a worthy goal, which it may well be, we are going to be compromised. It's entirely inevitable, because, as you say, we have hundreds of years of this tradition. It's like a morphogenetic field, which we're hardwired to want success, to want recognition, to want fame, to want a following, to want to be respected, and this, it's in the society, but it's also in us as individuals. Our imprinting as children, if we didn't get the affection or the attention we needed as children, we're compensating for that in the stuff we do as adults. And So there's all of these different motives, bubbling under the surface. And so for me to kid myself, or for any of us to kid ourselves that we're doing this because it's a service, to disseminate information, to wake up people, I think that's quite dangerous.
Why? Why?
As I say, well, because again, we're looking outward. It may be that it is good for our process to play that role, but only if we're aware that it's just a role. You see what I mean? Rather than if we actually believe that we're doing something, because we don't actually really know, do we? What's going on? At least that's my understanding. I mean, that's what I've had to accept, that when you go down the rabbit hole, you just keep on going. We really don't know how deep the rabbit hole goes at this point. So all we know right off the bat, as soon as you get in the rabbit hole, is that nothing is what it seems. But then this compulsion of the intellect to, even though it knows that, to somehow create a new paradigm where, okay, well, now it is what it seems. Now it's a global agenda. Now it's the Illuminati. Now it's galactic consciousness. Now it's, Armageddon. All we're doing is creating another paradigm using the components of the old one, which we reshuffled. We haven't actually, and so we're actually halting our process or progress down the rabbit hole. It's like we're trying to get back out, in a sense, like Ike with his reptilians. He's discovered something that is imaginal, which is beyond this paradigm, and then he drags it screaming into this paradigm and says, look, reptilian blood drinking aliens. Not to turn Ike into a whipping boy here. We all do it. We just have to frame what we discover within the context of what we already know. And to me, that is it is at best counterproductive, and at worst it's fatal, because it will, one possible and very likely result is that it allows us to trick ourselves into thinking we found it, that we're tuning in to it. This emergence that we all feel that's happening in the world now, this emergence of this greater consciousness, I call it galactic consciousness, the imaginal realms, fairyland, alien intelligence. There's all these different ways of perceiving it, but none of them are actually it. When we're actually in it, we can't speak about it. We can't even think about it. And so what is it that we are describing here? I think that we sense an emergence, and so then we want to define it, and then we want to identify with it, and then we want to say, okay, we're this emergence, like Barack Obama with his "we are the ones we've been waiting for." I feel that is really not the case. I think that we are just, let's kind of get Nietzschean, man is a bridge. We're a bridge from one kind of consciousness to another, but we're not it. We're like the eggs that need to be cracked, and yet we're already talking about the omelette, like we know what it is, and like we are this emerging thing, and that I'm kind of starting to rant here, but it really did. It really did strike me that I was unconsciously playing this role and I realized that so many others in the community are doing it too. They're propagating ideas, and we're forming this new counterculture through the internet, particularly, and it is a time for that. I don't know if you know astrologically. I mean, the 60s, it was a Uranus-Pluto opposition, and that was the major astrological impetus behind the 60s. And we're in the same kind of opposition of planets now. I forget if it's a square. I think it's a square now of Uranus-Pluto, which is probably tougher.
Yes.
But there's also many other planetary alignments. And so what we're seeing now is the next cycle after the 60s, the next cycle up in the spiral, much, much bigger, much, much more transformative. And Uranus-Pluto is all about the awakening of the shadow and the awakening to the shadow.
Yes.
Which is it? If we awaken to the shadow within ourselves, then we are transformed. If it's an awakening of the shadow, it's an external process, then we are annihilated. Chances are, like in World War II, we have that kind of thing. Or to bring it back to the 60s, we had Manson as the disowned shadow of the counterculture. That because the hippies weren't able to awaken to the shadow within themselves, there was an awakening of the shadow in the external world, and the hippie became Charles Manson, which was probably a psyop, was probably a government-controlled operation in itself, Charles Manson. But then I think so was the 60s, and this is something I'd be interested to talk to you about also, is this idea that the 60s itself.
Aelous, I just want to interject and add something to what you said, because I think that you have a good point, and I think that what it's describing is the initial awareness of that, and begin to obviously change your own path if you feel that you're not comfortable with it. At the same time, I want to add from my personal point of view that I feel that we're in a process right now. It's like looking at someone who's taking, well, think about the idea of baby steps, right? It's like we're kicking the legs off, under a baby because we don't consider it proper walking in a way. But we need to consider that, okay, well, we need to give it a little bit of time as well. We are very, very, we're just begun to look into some of these more esoteric subjects. Many of us, at least, in that sense, and on a mass scale. It might be that more is coming along or less is. I'm not sure about the demographics there. To me, it feels like there is a little bit of a quote-unquote awakening going on in that sense. But I also feel that it's up to the receiver of the information and not as much as the disseminator of the information, because it's the consumer of the information, so to speak, must move on in the right time and not sit around and wait for someone else to kind of take their hand and lead them down the rabbit hole. So I understand what you're saying, yet at the same time, I don't want to take away the responsibility, if you will, from the one who is at the receiving end of all of this, if you know what I mean.
Well, absolutely. But I mean, the tendency is of us all, isn't it, is to want to be led down the rabbit hole. We look for leaders.
And that's the danger,
for teachers, for gurus. And that is the danger, because we don't have to do anything. I mean, as I say, I was actively conscious of avoiding that trap myself in what I did, but it didn't matter, because then that made people kind of want to follow me even more. And so it's just part of human nature. And yeah, I understand your metaphor with the baby, and it's a good one. And really, yes, this is why I said that I was wary of criticizing others, because I don't know what is right or good for others to do. I can only speak of my own sort of intuitive or gut feeling about this whole era. And I think, if I was becoming a bit overwrought about it, I think it's because of a sense of how easy it is for us to be tricked and to miss the boat, and of how it's happened before.
Of course,
what
absolutely.
We've seen with the 60s.
Yeah.
And I mean, we can even get paranoid about it, if you like, and consider the possibility, I would say the inevitability, that what I term the alternate perceptions community, which we're both active players, has going to have been co-opted from the very start, just as the 60s was. In the 60s, I don't know an awful lot in terms of names and dates and all the rest of it. Dave McGowan has done a lot of good work on this, and mapping the ways in which many of the bands and musical movements and all the rest of it seem to actually be part of a psyop, seem to have an intelligence fingerprints on them.
Yeah.
But I would say, just to use a very basic example, that the hippie, the whole idea of the hippie, that the word, the dress, the language, all of these ideas, I think, were created by intelligence when they became aware that something was happening, something